It was 3 a.m. in March 1972, and Elvis Presley sat alone in the darkness of his Graceland bedroom, staring at the empty space where Priscilla used to sleep. The separation papers had been signed, the lawyers had done their work, but his heart refused to accept the reality. In just a few hours, he would walk into a Nashville recording studio and pour his shattered soul into a song that would become his most haunting confession. Always on My Mind wasn't just a recording, it was Elvis's desperate love letter to the woman who had walked away, taking his heart with her forever. The silence in Graceland had become unbearable. For 15 years, these walls had echoed with Priscilla's laughter, her gentle voice calling his name, the soft rustle of her footsteps on the marble floors. Now, in February 1972, the mansion felt like a mausoleum. Every room a shrine to a love that was slipping through Elvis's fingers like sand. The signs had been there for months, perhaps years, but Elvis had been too consumed with his career, too blinded by the spotlight to see the loneliness growing in his wife's eyes. The constant touring, the pills to stay awake for performances and then to sleep afterward, the parade of yes-men and hangers-on who surrounded him, all of it had slowly built a wall between him and the woman who had been his anchor since Germany. That night, Priscilla sat across from him in their living room, her hands folded in her lap, tears streaming down the face he had kissed 10,000 times. Her words cut through him like shattered glass. She couldn't do it anymore, couldn't pretend that they still had a marriage when he was married to everyone and everything except her. She had met someone else, someone who saw her, really saw her, not as Elvis Presley's wife, but as Priscilla, the woman. Elvis felt his world crumble. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. He was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. He could have any woman he wanted, but the only woman he had ever truly loved was telling him that love wasn't enough anymore. He fell to his knees, literally begging her to stay, promising to change, to be the husband she deserved. But her eyes had already gone cold, her decision final. "I've always been on your mind, Elvis," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But I was never in your heart the way your career was. I was never your priority." The cruel irony of her words would haunt him forever. She had been on his mind constantly, obsessively. Every song he sang, every performance he gave, every decision he made was colored by his love for her. But somehow, in trying to give her the world, he had forgotten to give her himself. As she walked upstairs to pack her things, Elvis stood in the foyer of Graceland, the same spot where he had carried her across the threshold as his bride 5 years earlier. The man who had conquered the world had just lost the only battle that mattered. That night, as Priscilla slept in the guest room before leaving forever, Elvis sat at his piano and began to play, his tears falling on the keys as he tried to find the music that could express the agony in his soul. March 29, 1972. Elvis walked into RCA, Studio B in Nashville, like a ghost of his former self. It had been 6 weeks since Priscilla left, and those who knew him best barely recognized the broken man who stood before them. Gone was the confident swagger, the mischievous smile that had charmed millions. In its place was a hollow-eyed figure who seemed to be barely holding himself together. The musicians and engineers gathered that day knew something was different. Elvis had always been professional, even when dealing with personal struggles. But today he seemed fragmented, lost. Producer Felton Jarvis watched with growing concern as Elvis struggled through the first few songs of the session, his voice lacking its usual power and conviction. Then, someone suggested they try a song that had been sitting in the pile of potential recordings, a haunting ballad written by Wayne Carson, Johnny Christopher, and Mark James. As the opening chords of Always on My Mind filled the studio, something shifted in Elvis's demeanor. His shoulders straightened, his breathing deepened, and suddenly, the broken man transformed into an artist about to create his masterpiece of pain. The first take was extraordinary, but Elvis wasn't satisfied. He could feel something building inside him, a tsunami of emotion that demanded to be released. "Let me try that again," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. As the music began for the second time, Elvis closed his eyes and let himself fall into the abyss of his heartbreak. Happened next was pure magic born from pure agony. Elvis didn't just sing the song, he lived it, breathed it, bled it. Every word became a confession, every note a prayer to a God who might somehow bring Priscilla back to him. His voice cracked with emotion, soared with desperate hope, then broke again with the weight of his regret. The musicians stopped playing, tears in their eyes. As they witnessed something beyond performance, they were watching a man's soul being laid bare. When the song ended, the studio was silent, except for the sound of Elvis's ragged breathing. No one moved, no one spoke. They all knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a recording that would outlive them all, because it contained the purest human emotion ever captured on tape. "That's it," Elvis said finally, his voice hoarse. "That's the one." He didn't need to hear it back. He knew he had just sung the truest song of his life, a love letter written in melody and pain that would forever stand as his ultimate confession to the woman who was always on his mind. In the weeks following the recording session, Elvis became obsessed with the song he had just created. He would play the rough mix over and over again in his room at Graceland, each listening session opening fresh wounds in his already shattered heart. The empty mansion echoed with his voice, singing about regret, about words left unspoken, about love taken for granted until it was too late. Every line of the song felt like a personal indictment. He had been so focused on his career, on maintaining his image as the king, that he had forgotten to be a husband to the woman who had given up everything to be with him. The pills that helped him perform also made him distant and unpredictable. The constant touring meant months away from home, leaving Priscilla to raise their daughter Lisa Marie essentially as a single mother. Late at night, Elvis would sit by the phone, his finger hovering over Priscilla's number, desperate to call her and pour out his heart. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong. She hadn't just been on his mind. She had been his mind, his heart, his very soul. Every success he had achieved was meaningless without her there to share it with him. But pride, fear, and the devastating knowledge that it might truly be too late kept him from making those calls. Song became his surrogate voice, saying everything he couldn't bring himself to say directly. When Always on My Mind was released, Priscilla heard it, and those close to her said she wept. She understood immediately what Elvis was trying to tell her through the music, but understanding and forgiveness were two different things. The damage to their marriage had been too extensive, the hurt too deep. Elvis began performing the song in his live shows, and audiences could sense the raw authenticity of his emotion. Women in the crowd would cry openly as he sang, feeling the genuine pain in his voice. Men would think of their own relationships, their own failures to show love properly. The song became more than entertainment. It became a shared human experience of regret and lost love. But for Elvis, each performance was torture. Every night, he stood on stage and relived his greatest failure, singing his confession to thousands of strangers, while the one person he most wanted to hear it remained beyond his reach. The song that should have been his redemption became his nightly penance, a beautiful torment that reminded him of everything he had lost through his own blindness and selfishness. As 1972 turned into 1973, Elvis threw himself into performing with an intensity that worried everyone around him. The divorce was finalized, but the song Always on My Mind continued to grow in popularity, becoming one of his most requested numbers. Audiences didn't just want to hear it, they needed to hear it, as if Elvis's pain somehow validated their own heartbreaks and regrets. The irony wasn't lost on those close to Elvis. The song that represented his greatest personal failure was becoming one of his greatest professional successes. Radio stations played it constantly, and it resonated with listeners in a way that few songs ever do. People heard their own stories in Elvis's confession, their own failures to appreciate love while they had it. But success couldn't heal Elvis's broken heart. He began to spiral deeper into prescription drug use, his performances becoming increasingly erratic. Friends and family watched helplessly as the man who had everything seemed determined to destroy himself. The weight of his regret, crystallized in those 3.5 minutes of recorded heartbreak, was consuming him from the inside out. Priscilla, meanwhile, was building a new life with karate instructor Mike Stone, the man she had left Elvis for. She was finding happiness again, discovering who she was outside of being Mrs. Elvis Presley. But she couldn't escape the song either. Everywhere she went, "Always on My Mind" seemed to follow her, a haunting reminder of the love she had walked away from and the man she had left broken in its wake years later. After Elvis's death in 1977, Priscilla would say that "Always on My Mind" was the closest Elvis ever came to apologizing to her, T.O. acknowledging his failures as a husband. It was his way of saying he was sorry for all the things he never said, all the attention he never gave, all the love he never properly showed. The song became his eternal confession, playing long after his voice had been silenced forever. Today, "Always on My Mind" remains one of Elvis's most beloved recordings, not because of its musical complexity, but because of its emotional honesty. It stands as proof that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain, and that true love songs aren't about happiness. They're about loss, regret, and the terrible knowledge that we often don't appreciate what we have until it's gone forever. "Always on My Mind" became more than just a song. It became Elvis's most honest moment, a window into the human heart behind the legend. His pain became our pain, his regret our reminder to love better while we still can. In losing Priscilla, Elvis gave the world a masterpiece of heartbreak that continues to move listeners decades later. Have you ever heard a song that captured your deepest emotions? Share this story and let us know in the comments which songs have touched your heart. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories behind the music that defines our lives.